Let me know if you can hear this.
Hi everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to the Museum of Art. My name is Amelia Kale and I'm the Barbara C. and Harvey P. Hood 1918 Senior Curator of Academic Programming, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today for this A Space for Dialogue talk. A Space for Dialogue is the Hood student-curated exhibition program that started in 2001, and this is our 124th exhibition and talk. Just a little bit of housekeeping. You all know the deal. Silence your cell phones and take note of the location of the emergency exits, which are located at the front and the rear of the auditorium. And now we get to the good part. I am very pleased to introduce Chandini. Chandini is a Dartmouth 25 or a senior, graduating in just over a week. She is the Hood Museum of Art's Erbe Intern and is supervised by Michael Hartman, our Associate Curator of American Art. At the museum, she has helped Michael on curatorial research on objects from the Kirk and Fairbrother collection, as well as working on acquisition reports. Chandini is an art history major modified with anthropology, and she is minoring in French and neuroscience. On campus, she has founded Ephemera, Dartmouth's Art and Art History Journal. During her off terms, she's interned at art galleries, and after graduation, she is moving to New York City to pursue a career in the art world, a development we at the museum are thrilled by. So welcome, Chandini. Before I dive in, I just want to say a few quick thank yous. I want to thank the Hood Museum for offering me this incredible opportunity to curate a show and supporting me throughout the entire process. I also want to extend a special thank you to Michael Hartman, who was my direct supervisor at the Hood. I learned so much from Michael. Creating the show from the ground up was not an easy task, and it was through Michael's guidance and support that I was able to be a success, or hopefully that's what you guys all think. He was willing to sit with me as I debated between originally, I think it was like 30 different directions for the show, and then we would decide on what felt really strong and really good, and then I would come back in with like 15 new different directions for the show, and so I could see how Michael would get frustrated by that. And would really debate the differences between colors of walls that all practically looked the same to really helping me out find my language and choices in my optic label. I'm just extremely grateful for the mentorship and the opportunity to learn from him. And along similar lines, I really want to thank Amelia for that warm introduction and for her ongoing support throughout my initial interview process to just a couple days ago practicing this speech in this very room. And I also want to thank Sharon, Sue, Matt, Emery, Olivia, Christy, Neely, Ryan, Nikki, Allie, and Randall for all their help for the nitty-gritty details of my show, from framing to copyright permissions. And once again, I just want to thank the Hood in general and the staff. You truly made my senior year a treat, and I'm very, very thankful for this opportunity. Without further ado, I'm going to launch into the talk about my exhibition, In the Space Between. This exhibition for me is not just about past or the present, but it's about the space that exists between them. The moments we want to return to, the stories that we inherit, and the memories that refuse to fade within our lives. The works in this show feel suspended in time and depict moments that are caught between times of remembrance and becoming. These are not simply memories, but are turning points in the artists' lives. These artists do not portray time as fixed or finite, but as an ongoing conversation between past, present, and future. Here, forward motion doesn't function as an escape, but instead a confrontation with oneself. Each work reveals how deeply the present is shaped by what refuses to be left behind. In this unfolding, time becomes an invitation to reflect, to return, and to reimagine. It forces us to ask ourselves, what truths await in that return, and how might we carry them forward? I want to begin with a painting that has become the visual and conceptual anchor for my exhibition. This is Alan Darkangelo's Hello and Goodbye. Darkangelo's canvas is stark yet resonant. It is a flat graphic depiction of a highway extending toward an unreachable horizon. Its bold, linear geometry mirrors the efficiency and seduction of modern movement. The road it offers is deceptively simple. The flat black top, the receding line, and the absence of human figures. It creates a uniform haze that evokes not just forward motion, but a numbing sameness. A life lived with blinders on, where routine replaces reflection and movement becomes mechanical. There are no figures here, as you can see. There are no markers of place or individuality, only the quiet anxiety of momentum without direction. The orange rectangle on the left of the canvas functions as a barrier. It is sudden and opaque and breaks that hazy spell. It interrupts the ideal of endless progression and punctures the illusion of neutrality. At first glance, the painting appears to follow the conventions of a typical modern landscape painting. But perched atop the canvas is a real rear-view mirror, which quietly disrupts the scene. It is no decorative flourish, and instead Darkangelo reframes the composition entirely. This gesture makes the painting immersive. The road is not simply seen, it is experienced. The work places the viewer inside the car mid-journey. We are no longer detached observers of the piece, but travelers on this very road painted ahead. Painted in the rearview mirror is a reflection of the road already traveled. It bends the viewer's perception of time and space. It introduces a second dimension, not just the forward gaze of movement, but the backward glance of memory. Darkangelo's painting does not indulge in nostalgia.
But it doesn't worship the future either. Instead, it visualizes how the present is always composed of fragments. A flick of what we've passed, a glint of what's coming, and the unsettling silence of the in-between liminal space. D'Arcangelo once said, with the passage of time, nothing has happened anyway. This statement really undercuts the supposed drama of the scene. Change, he suggests, is simply illusory. The road stretches on, and the journey itself becomes its own quiet loop of repetition and reckoning. That is the deeper truth that this painting carries, that the act of moving forward requires looking back, not as an indulgence, but as a necessity. D'Arcangelo offers more than a striking visual of stasis. It affirms the central truth threaded throughout this exhibition. This work materializes the idea of time not as a clean forward line, but as an intertwining process. The highway is both future and present, future and past, expectation and recollection, while the present slips between them, elusive and unstable. That pulse of movement is shaped by memory, which reverberates through every work in the show, anchoring each piece in the tension between remembrance and becoming. This notion of return is present across the exhibition. Darren Siwaz, an Aboriginal artist, asks in his own searing way, what do we inherit and how do we live with it? In this work entitled Give Way, from his Misperception series, he turns his lens toward cultural inheritance and the spectral residue of colonial trauma. He casts himself as a ghost, suspended between visibility and disappearance, haunting the streets and suburbs of Adelaide in South Australia. You can see this through looking at his legs. You can see through the pants and how you can almost see the landscape through where the road is supposed to be, but instead it is just all-encompassing darkness. This happens through a long exposure photography technique, where his body flickers in and out of presence. This visual aspect of the piece works as a metaphor for histories that have been marginalized, denied, or forgotten. He's framed at a crossroads beneath road signs and trees as he stands between worlds, at the boundary of the urban and the natural, the technological and the ancestral, and light and darkness. This tension is central to the image, the man-made environment which is encompassed by the street lamps, pavement, signage, which then coexist uneasily with the darkness of the surrounding bush. Both spaces bear the stamp of subjugation. They are neither neutral nor untouched. Siwaz is dressed in Western business attire. He appears immobile yet defiant. This is shown through his steady stance and his uncompromising gaze. His figure asks the question, is he disappearing from view or coming into being? Is he meant to be Aboriginal, European, or something in between? These open-ended questions animate the image and reflect the broader ambiguities of Indigenous identity in a settler colonial world. Siwaz, of Aboriginal and Dutch descent, deliberately resists the romanticization of Indigenous tradition or the straightforward politics of guilt. He has explained that he doesn't see his role as changing the world with his art, but understands how it can influence society. He wants to create works that comment on the differences between class and inequalities that exist in our society. His choice of medium being photography is crucial. Photography is a technological and urban tool. It continues the legacy of Indigenous artists who, since the adoption of acrylic on canvas in the 1970s, have used Western materials not to assimilate, but to assert their cultural presence on their own terms. Siwaz does not retreat into ethnographic nostalgia. Instead, he brings Aboriginal identity into the heart of contemporary Australia, occupying and haunting the spaces that once sought out to erase him. Siwaz's work arrives just 2 years after Australia's first Sorry Day, which was a public acknowledgement of the brutal history of the stolen generations, which were Aboriginal children forcibly removed from their families under state-sanctioned policies. His spectral presence embodies the cultural hauntings that still persist in modern-day Australia. The crossroads in his imagery becomes not only a place of indecision, but a place of confrontation. To move forward, we must acknowledge the depth of what came before. Identity in Siwaz's work is never self-contained. It is shaped by legacies which are often invisible to the eye, but deeply embedded in who we are. In this work, Siwaz embodies the pulse of my exhibition by reckoning with his own cultural past to confront the ongoing legacies of colonialism. He's not treating this topic as a collective trauma, but as a personal inheritance. His ghost-like figure becomes a vessel for histories that continue to reverberate in the lives of Aboriginal people today. His gaze implicates the viewer. We are no longer passive observers, but participants in an uneasy conversation about recognition, reconciliation, and responsibility. CUIs invites us to witness not only the weight of the past, but the urgency of confronting it in the present. His work urges a larger reckoning, one that begins with individual identity but radiates outward, asking how each of us might challenge individual systems, inherited systems, disrupt silences, and shape a more honest future through open dialogue and collective memory. Where CUIs addresses cultural hauntings, David Hilliard turns inward, exploring the intimate terrain of familial inheritance. In his photographic triptych entitled Rock Bottom, Hilliard stages a haunting meditation on time, identity, and the imprints we carry from those closest to us. The artist depicts two mirrored stages of life. In the leftmost panel, you'll see the artist's father aging body, submerged in water up to his chest, his face softened by age and seeming to sag into the foreground of the image. Whilst in the rightmost panel, you see David, the artist. Standing in the water, he appears to be agile, alert, but distant as he's nearing the shore. Time here stretches across the three panels. It evokes a life lived, a relationship endured, and aging from youth to old age. The middle panel shows a lake between father and son, which becomes more than a setting. It's a threshold that reflects both continuity and distance. It binds them in their shared lineage, but also separates them with the quiet ache of emotional and psychological distance. As you can see, both on Hilliard and his father's body, they're both marked by similar tattoos. Hilliard marks his body with an updated version of his father's swallow tattoos. It's a symbolic gesture that literalizes the imprint of inheritance. The swallow bird is known for its instinctive return home, which becomes a metaphor for the pull of memory, love, and inevitability. His father marked himself with these tattoos for a stint in the Navy. Choosing these tattoos acknowledges the ways his father has influenced him. However, this choice doesn't represent mere imitation. Hilliard did not join the Navy, but he chose a different path. Instead, David Hilliard's tattoos embody a balanced act of remembrance and autonomy, where the son actively chooses to carry aspects of his father's legacy forward, but on his own terms. Rock Bottom is part of Hilliard's Tag Decade series. This was about a 30-year photographic collaboration with his father, Raymond Hilliard. The series chronicles their evolving relationship and his father's eventual passing. It offers a glimpse into the physical, emotional, and psychological landscapes that they've navigated together over their years. Hilliard's parents divorced when he was a young boy. He remembers being jostled between homes, cities, and various routines. In response, he turned to photography. He captured his room, his toys, and his shifting environment. This served as a way for him to reclaim agency over the instability of his upbringing. These early impulses matured into a practice rooted in control, construction, and heightened realism. Hilliard saw his photographs as visual possibilities of what could be, what might have been, and what he'd still like to be in his life. The artist has spoken very openly about the layered and pretty difficult relationship he shared with his father. Growing up, he learned to navigate emotional unpredictability, constantly attuning to shifts in mood in order to keep a sense of calm in the home. His father's approval was always there, but often came with strings attached, requiring effort, compromise, and emotional vigilance. You can feel the weight of that experience in the photograph themselves. They're beautifully composed and carefully staged, but there's a kind of quiet pressure beneath the surface, a psychological intensity that mirrors the balancing act that he's been doing for all of his life. What emerges is not a portrait of a father and a son, but a reflection on how our earliest relationship shapes the architecture of our adult selves. Through this intimate staging, Hilliard explores what it means to inherit, not just genetics, but temperament, memory, and longing. The image appears as a kind of anticipatory memorial for his father, offering the two of them a chance to visualize the end before its arrival, and to reimagine connection while time still allows for it. In this work, Hilliard crystallizes the central current of the exhibition, that reckoning with the past whether that's cultural, familial, or psychological, is not optional, but inevitable. Rock bottom reveals how personal inheritance compels the individual to look inward and ask difficult questions. What parts of ourselves are ours alone, and what are echoes of those who raised us? Through photography, Hilliard opens a space for us to do the same, to reflect on the quiet hauntings that live within our own bloodlines and the choices that we make in response. But the work and series in general gestures forward, toward an even deeper reckoning, which is mortality. In the final phase of Hilliard's series, Hilliard and his father began to speak openly about his father's death. They began planning and composing the final image of the project together. Through witnessing the gradual physical and emotional decay of a parent, and eventually grieving that loss, Hilliard confronted the disorienting realization that the people that have loomed so large in his life, seemingly permanent fixtures, are in fact impermanent. To me, my parents exist in a super strange sphere of time. It's almost impossible to envision my life without them, and it's almost easily impossible to imagine their lives before I existed. Yet through this project, Hilliard invites us to acknowledge what we so often resist, that those we love are not immortal, and neither are we. The fragility mirrored in our own forces us to reckon not only with their disappearance, but with our own eventual absence from the world. Where Hilliard stages the emotional proximity of father and son through time, Tooker renders the aftermath through crafting a work about his mother, whilst grieving her death in this work entitled Farewell, which you can see on the right of this exhibition view. It shows the stillness of parting, the moment when a loved one is no longer reachable, and yet their presence in our lives is not fully gone. We are not just witnessing true portrayals of loss. We are participating in a conversation between generations, between past and present, between the visibility of aging and the invisibility of absence. Farewell by George Tooker anchors us in that aching threshold, reminding us that parting is never clean, and that identity is forged not in forgetting, but in the quiet, ongoing act of looking back and moving forward. This work is inspired by the sterile corridor of the hospital where his mother passed away. Tooker renders the scene not with sentimentality, but with unsettling clarity. The painting's corridor is constructed through a rhythm of cool-toned, interlocking geometric frames that extend into a vanishing point that never quite resolve, but is met with a figure in the middle. As you look into the vanishing point, the interlocking boxes appear to almost float within the space. This liminal space is more than a setting. It's a psychological condition. The endless hallway becomes a visual metaphor for grief's temporal distortion, where the world continues, but the mourner is suspended. Tooker once described the work as a reversible space, a state of shock, articulating both the personal rupture of his mother's death and the broader universal destabilization that grief incites. Time here doesn't progress, and instead, it hovers. Tooker does not depict grief as a process of closure, but as a recursive act of remembering and refeeling. The painting becomes not a tribute to finality, but a meditation on the way mourning shapes our orientation to time and self. In the center of the boxes, a blue figure stands, anonymous and engulfed by the architecture of the scene. It is widely assumed, given the context of the work and the deep personal nature of Tooker's intention, that this is Tooker's mother. But at first glance, the figure blends with the surroundings, barely distinct from the walls. This ambiguity is deliberate and can speak to the universality of loss. Farewell invites viewers to project their own memories and their own farewells. The anonymity of the subject becomes the mirror, one through which we confront our own encounters with mortality and the haunting realization that those we love will eventually exist only in memory. The lines of the geometric boxes are highlighted in a red and orange tint, meant to emulate light in dual identities, both the aggressive light of the fluorescent lighting in a hospital and the ethereal glow of the warm light that accompanies one's passage to death. The composition's disjointed lighting, where illumination slips in from this unseen door in the hospital, creates an effect of no clear beginning or end, no clear exit, and no way out. This denies the viewer any straightforward narrative of peace or resolution. Instead, we are held in the same liminality as this figure. between past and future, and life and death. Even the medium Tooker employs, like tempera, underscores this tension. It's a laborious layering process that produces a luminous, almost sacred quality, recalling Renaissance devotional painting, while also demanding the viewer to slow down and linger in the scene. This sense of slowness, both in material and meaning, parallels the emotional viscosity of grief. Tooker's farewell thus resists resolution. It does not console its viewer, nor does it claim to understand. Instead, it insists that mourning is not a detour on the way to healing, but a necessary confrontation with time, memory, and identity. The painting doesn't ask us to move on, but to sit with what lingers, to recognize that the future is shaped not just by aspiration, but by remembrance. If Tooker's farewell suspends us in the stillness of parting, being caught in this emotional threshold where presence gives way to memory, Tom Young takes us deeper into the murky terrain of what follows, the quiet echo of absence and the fluid entanglement of personal history with places, and the ways memory reshapes perceptions over time. This work is entitled, When I Close My Eyes. By the quiet accumulation of the past and the textures of the everyday, Young offers a dreamlike landscape, one where memory is not a destination, but one we drift through again and again. Young encapsulates at the idea that the past is never neatly left behind. Rather, it spirals into the present, shaping how we feel, see, and locate ourselves in the world. This work is a photographic meditation on this drift. It's layered like a thought or a memory. The work moves from intimate to historical in 4 distinct registrars: a sleeping child in a car, a snow-blanketed pond, a stack of weathered books, and an unmade bed. But these are not simply sequential images. They behave more like echoes, each one surfacing from the previous, each charged with some type of emotional residue. At the base of the image is a child slumped in slumber in the backseat of a car, bundled tightly in a winter coat. Her cheeks are red with cold, lips parted, and one eye barely open. This is the emotional grounding of the work, where everything begins, the vulnerability of childhood and the momentary escape of sleep. This is no mere portrait, and instead this child appears as a dreamer. Her sleep not empty, but generative. Above her, the images rise, not as mere records of a space, but as layers of memory or emotional resonance that she might be conjuring in real time. Young, at the age of 10 years old, underwent a period of blindness due to surgery. That infuses this moment with a deeper meaning. A body at rest, while the mind travels sensory pathways, as if reacquainting itself with the world. What we see may be the child's dream or one of Young's. Directly above the child is a landscape scene. The snow falls thick and fast onto a frozen pond. The visual weight shifts here from the warm, flesh-toned world of the sleeping child to a stark, silent terrain of snowflakes caught mid-air. Although connected logically to the child's attire in the car seat, this landscape is hushed and heavy, and evokes not just winter, but pause. The suspended sense of waiting, where the present becomes repetitive to memory. Is the child dreaming of an earlier experience on this same pond, or is this image a mental echo of winter in general, a generic yet intimate symbol of time, season, and solitude? Above the pond, we enter a more abstract symbolic space. Tightly stacked books arranged in uniform rows. The spines and pages show varying degrees of age and wear. Their content is unknown, but their symbolism is clear. There are archives, whether familial scrapbooks, textbooks, or institutional records. They represent accumulated knowledge, and importantly, the burden of history. The books hold memory not just as fact, but as effective weight, the emotional residue of what we choose to record, to remember, and to pass on. Here, Young bridges the personal and the collective. Much like the landscape, he photographs the books, which becomes both ordinary and monumental. They may belong to the child's family or to a larger cultural memory. They speak of inheritance, of information preserved, and of the gap between what is lived and what is remembered. The highest and darkest layer of the image is that of an unmade bed. Rather than evoking restfulness, this image leads into discomfort. The lighting is stark and brooding, and the shadows are heavy. It appears as the aftermath of sleep, or perhaps rest interrupted. If the sleeping child begins the narrative, the bed can signify where they might end up. In Jung's work, time is not chronological, but atmospheric. It mirrors how memory works, fractured, recursive, layered with emotion. These are not just visual fragments, but mnemonic triggers. Each image carrying its own emotional temperature and bleeds into the next. What makes this work especially resonant is how deeply it emerges from Tom Young's own biography. I mentioned already that at age 10, following surgery, Young spent weeks with his eyes bandaged shut. It was in that darkness that his other senses expanded, reshaping how he perceived the world around him. That experience of living in the world by sensing rather than seeing that became the foundation of his photographic presence. That sense of being out of time, both disconnected and hyper-aware, lingers in his photographs. He feels as if he's looking both out into the world and back into himself, where the world in front of himself feels both familiar and mysterious. It is precisely this dissonance between what we know and what we feel that what defines Jung's visual language. His photographs do not just show us the world. They return us to it as if memory charged with the full weight of what has been lost, carried, and remembered. In Jung's universe, to see is not merely to look, but to feel the past pressed gently against the present. To understand that memory lives not just in images, but in the textures, absences, and atmospheres of life. Like light filtering through closed eyes, these photographs remind us that the world we inhabit is always layered, with histories we do not choose, but carry with us nonetheless. As we near the end of my talk, I find myself returning to Alan Darkangelo's Hello and Goodbye, where I said this work forces the viewer into the scene. I want to push that a little bit further and ask you all to locate yourselves on your own road, to recognize the moment of arrival and departure, of memory and momentum, and to consider, where have you been? Where are you going? And most urgently, who are you right now? Each work in this exhibition, in its own way, forces both the artist and the viewer to confront a piece of themselves, to reckon with memory, mortality, transition, and the self in flux. Darkangelo captures this poignantly. It's a meditation on time's slipperiness and the strange beauty of what being caught in between means, moving forward while still being tethered to what's behind. When I first began curating this show, I had dozens of ideas for the works, themes, directions that all felt super meaningful in their own right to me. But I kept returning to this emotional undercurrent that I couldn't ignore, the quiet aching reckoning with the passage of time. As a senior on my way out, which many of you guys are too in the audience, I was thinking a lot about my past at Dartmouth and in general, the uncertainty of what's ahead for us and the ever-present difficulty of grounding myself in the present. I have a tendency to live between poles, nostalgic for moments already past, while constantly planning for what's coming next. This exhibition became my way of understanding what it means to be here right now, of looking not at time as something linear or external, but as something deeply interior. Time is my identity, and time is becoming myself. In building the show, I wanted to create a space not just for my own reflection, but for others to do the same. My hope is that in the space between offers room for viewers to engage emotionally, to ask themselves where these themes resonate in their own lives. How do we confront the unresolved? How do we carry it forward? How do we allow art and artists to help us face the versions of ourselves we've been, the ones we're not, and the ones we still might become? I'm deeply grateful for everyone that helped bring this exhibition to life, and for the artists whose work continue to challenge and move me. Thank you all for being here today, and I'd be happy to answer some questions. Yeah, James.
I know that you said you've taken this project in a lot of different directions. I was just curious if you had identified your subject matter and then picked the pieces that went along with that, or if this figures into different stages of the development.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say I started, Michael probably knows the number better than me, but maybe a checklist of like, I don't know, 30 works or so, and then it slowly got like dwindled down because I apparently have really good taste, and Michael already had those works for his show allotted for the museum, and so I couldn't use some of those works. Or like, there's like a rule with photography, if it's already been out in the museum, it needs to sit for like 3 years, and so it's like, couldn't use those works, and so slowly it dwindled down to works that I felt super passionately about and that like fit my theme. I would say a mix of both. I feel like I knew I wanted to do something in regards to that like last theme of like looking forward, moving back throughout the whole time. And there's a lot in the Hood collection, so it's hard to like sort through all the objects, but I feel like I had my theme, and then I really went from like a checklist of like 30, 40 works to 5, because it can fit on the walls, and it's what felt most strong to me as well.
Okay, so along the same vein, when you were going through and narrowing it down, I know you said that Dark Angelo piece was kind of the central work. Did you know that that was going to be in your show the entire time, or did you only decide that towards the end after the all art pieces?
That's a really good question. I think Dark Angel was the only work on my final checklist that lasted through all the trials and tribulations. Honestly, the Hilliard came last, which is also my favorite work in the show now. And the Tooker was also a work that was consistently in every single checklist I had made throughout the process. And then the Young came later, and then Give Way came later as well. Yeah.
In the Darlangelo piece, the artist has chosen to cross the center divider, which at least for me is a reminder that on the left and the right are blind sides. And I'm wondering what the artist has chosen to not show. So is it the artist with his canvas and the paints? Is it people in the artist's lives? Like, what is missing from just looking straight ahead and straight behind that left and the right blind sides? Like, what is the artist choosing not to show us?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I personally don't know what he wasn't going to incorporate into the scene, but I feel like that goes well in my thematics, in the sense that that ambiguity plays into the sense of like, it could be anyone's journey on that road, and you could put in your own context of as you're taking that journey that he intended it to be. Yeah.
This was incredible, amazing. And I have a question that's kind of twofold. So, like, something that I'm noticing about a lot of your pieces is like they're all very like geometric, and it's a lot of like shapes and squares and rectangles. And like that to me feels like like the passage of time kind of being in blocks. And time feels also like super fluid to me. So I was just like wondering how you were like the decisions you made to choose those pieces, how that like facilitates your understanding of time and as of time.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's honestly how I found most of these works, was the way that I was looking for. I was originally, the title of my piece was about emotional passageways or something like that, and it was all about how time functions as this pathway and doorway. And so that is very intentional, that every work has this kind of progression that you feel as a viewer of these pieces, and that resonates thematically with the artist's intention as well.
This might be an ignorant question, but I'd be curious to hear you speak a bit more about how, so it feels like, for example, Give Way wasn't, that's feels like a piece that has a more specific and defined intention behind it, whereas, for example, the Dark Angelo piece feels a bit more, like I'm saying, more ambiguous and how you can interpret it. So I'd be curious to hear you talk a bit more about how the explicit intention behind a piece and the
that's a really good question. A lot of research, because I really wanted to make sure that I wasn't just putting my own interpretive take on all of the works and really ignore the artist's intention with these works. I agree that like the Dark Angelo is a lot less personal in nature from a lot of the other works where they have that like very deeply embedded personal story. It was a lot of like realizing my intention of the piece with the artist's intention and trying to find a middle ground that made sense for both of us and where I was doing justice for the work, if that makes sense. Yeah. Same.
Thank you, Chandini. This was incredible. I went upstairs and saw the exhibit before coming down, and I wonder if you could speak to the Dark Angelo piece and then it being the giveaway piece on the other side of the doorway, and then like I don't know if you had intention, or assuming you did, on the placement of the different pieces, and so I wanted to hear your reasoning behind placement.
Yeah, layouting the show is really fun. I think when I played with like the little model, having a show of 5 works is really nice because I can genuinely try every single variation of having every single work on every different wall. I knew it was important to me that I wanted the Hilliard and the Tooker to stand together on the same wall and kind of be the focal point of my exhibition. I felt like thematically that's where I was strongest, and biasly it's the 2 works that I love the most in my show. And I also knew that like as the viewer like walks into the gallery and turns the corner, I wanted Dark Angelo to be the first thing they see because I thought it really anchored my piece in that like moment of stasis and kind of puts you in the right like mental framework to take on the rest of the works in the show. And then Give Way and The Young just naturally became the bookends of my show because I felt really passionately for those 3 works to sit in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, like just to echo everyone else, thank you so much for this. This is so amazing and so brilliant and so just like thoughtful and thought-provoking. And I guess I'm wondering if you see like where you see this exhibit going next, and if you see this kind of like theme of liminality following you as you pursue your career like in the art world.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Where the exhibit is going, it's going to stay up for a little bit longer. And then it's going to come down and another student's exhibition is going to go up after. Literally, that's what's going to happen. Yeah, but thematically, I think these themes of like space and identity will definitely come with me to like shape my curatorial vision, hopefully in the future. If I'm able to be given this opportunity to have my own space again in a future institution. But I think that this show for me was something that was so personal, and I worked on it the whole year, and I knew that it was going to be up for graduation, and that was something that I talked to Amelia about, and we thought it made sense thematically, and that it would make a lot of sense. And so I guess short term, what my intention with the exhibition is honestly for you guys and putting yourselves and thinking about like what it makes you think about as you guys are becoming real, as we're all becoming real adults. And where that puts you on your path of becoming and where it puts you in your part of your identity. And that was my intention, to just start some kind of discussion with it, whether that's between friends or between yourself. And that was my intention with the show. Yeah.
Going off your last answer, given how much time and energy and thought you put into this, and especially the theme behind it, how has that affected what you are viewing your own future and reconciling with the past?
Whoa. Like kind of dark way. I feel like my show had kind of dark themes, like the whole mortality part. And so it honestly made me think about dying a little bit, and like kind of like made me think about how I want to make my mark on the world, and it made me think about like what was most important to myself in the future about prioritizing the things that maybe necessarily don't make logistical sense, but they make emotional sense, and prioritizing a life of happiness and fulfillment versus just following like a ladder of life. And so I think that's what my exhibition made me, like honestly crafting this exhibition, writing all the text was a form of therapy for me. And I really enjoyed doing it. And so, yeah, I think that answers your question. Awesome. Well, oh, yeah, Professor Weinstein.
So I couldn't help but notice that with all of the works that you chose, there's a complete lack of clamorousness, sound. Everything that you chose was really still and quiet. And I'm wondering if you could, and I heard you use the word quiet a couple of times, but it wasn't a kind of major theme in what you were saying. But I'm wondering, going from the 30 works down to the 5 works, if you eliminated objects that were loud, and if you purposely chose quiet works that they're all kind of, I noticed they're radically still, all of them. And I'm wondering how, if you meant to do that, and when you became conscious of it, and how that plays into the theme.
Yeah, I don't think I was that conscious of it in the beginning of my process, but it was when I started writing my object labels that I was like really doing like deep visual analysis and sitting with these works that I came to that same realization that I was like, this is a very still show, and I think that kind of went in with like the emotional, like mental space that I kind of wanted the viewer to sit in as they're like walking through the exhibition, to kind of be like suspended in that moment of stillness and to be with like just their own thoughts and the stories of the works that were at play. Yeah, Professor Coffey.
Great job, Chandini. It's a joy to see you present. As you know, you and I both have a love of the gap. We like long text. And we've also been working on different kinds of writing this term. And I know you have labels for each of your objects. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the approach you took for writing those labels in terms of showing, telling, what kinds of strategies did you consciously use, and what did you decide to kind of let leave up to the viewer, given the depth of your understanding of these works?
Yeah, of course. As you and Professor Hornstein know, I really struggle to be concise. And so my object labels were like a page each. And Michael was like, no, that's not what we do. And so I really worked to focus on what was really important visually to also the narrative that I was trying to like create with the show. And so I really took the most salient elements visually from the work that I felt was like the strongest to align with my thematic narrative of my show. And then I kind of chopped it down, and then saw what worked. I think each object label is very different from one another. Some are very artist quotation heavy, honestly, about what was important about their story that I felt I couldn't articulate in my own words, and it felt best for the artist to talk for themselves. And some are very visually based about what is important for the viewer to look at in this image to understand why this work fits in my show and why, out of all the works in the Hood collection, this is what needs to be on the wall. Please.
Congratulations on an excellent show and an excellent talk today. I used to live in New York City, and it occurs to me that of all the things you could say about New York City, calm, still, quiet, none of those apply. They may apply to Hanover and campus. In your personal transition to Hanover to New York City, how do you see this evolving of kind of that sense that you have here? Is that like a personal space that you can sit on the subway and you were in your sense of calm, or how do you see that changing to a very robust thing that is rarely calm or quiet or serene?
Yeah, sure. As many people in this room know, I'm a very loud individual. And so I strive well with noise. And so honestly, in like the hustle and bustle of New York City, I feel like I am most calm when I'm surrounded by a sea of people. And so it's kind of nice also being in that environment versus Dartmouth, where it is calm, but it's everyone you know all the time, everywhere. And so it's kind of your anonymity is increased in New York, and there's kind of a calmness in that. And so I think that answers your question. That would be kind of my mental transformation from going from here to New York as well. If no one has any other questions, you can go ahead and head up to Gutman where the exhibition is. Feel free to take your time and think about your own stories as you look at all the works. And again, thank you guys so much for coming, and thank you to the Hood Museum for allowing me to do this.